thought we had positive meetings yesterday. Obviously, the Ukrainians have to go back home. They have to run it by their president. They have to take into account, their views on all of this, and we hope to hear back from them very soon. But we need to figure out here now, within a matter of days, whether this is doable in the short term. Because if it's not, then I think we're just going to move on.
In Perth, Australia is Alexey Muraviev, an Associate Professor of National Security and Strategic Studies at Curtin University. Welcome to the program, Alexey. Is that an empty threat?
Well, I think it's a mix of being an empty threat as well as an indicator that the United States is sort of prepared to effectively drop the shuttle diplomacy and perhaps not abandon the current situation because it's part of the election promises of Donald Trump, but perhaps resort to other means of persuasion. And we need to understand why it's been said now, because we're now coming into, well, for the Europeans and the Christians, the Easter break, and there were expectations that ceasefire may be reached before Easter holidays. And we're just days away from Trump administration marking 100 days in the office. So clearly, without achieving any tangible results, the way how Trump promised to his electorate as well as to the world when he would finish the war the following day after he would step into the office, then it would be just a matter of weeks or a matter of days. I think Marco Rubio is trying to up the ante and apply additional pressure on all parties involved, which is the Russians, the Ukrainians, as well as the Europeans.
Alexey, the Europeans are trying to tell the Americans that Vladimir Putin can't be trusted. But the Americans seem to understand that, obviously, if they don't have Putin on side, then there's going to be no deal. But regarding the sincerity with which the Russian president has been proceeding, how do you see that in terms of, is he playing the Americans, or is he really going to look into how to end this war?
Look, I think I would like to make 2 points here. One is the Russians are saying exactly the same to the Americans about the Ukrainians as well as the Europeans. So I think the Americans hear same message coming from all sides, finger pointing at each other. The second point, that when it comes to conversations between the Russians and the Americans, Ukraine represents only one segment of what they're discussing. In fact, what I observe here is almost like 2 or 3 parallel conversations that the Russians and Americans are having. And in this sense, Washington is quite mindful of the other conversations they're having with the Russians concerning questions of strategic stability, concerning restoring of bilateral relations, concerning other matters such as the Arctic, the space, and so on, Middle Eastern situation. And that's why they try not to cross wires or cross lines, because if they will start getting confrontational with the Russians on the Ukraine issue, that would compromise their dialogue with the Kremlin on issues they're discussing in parallel to the conversation on Ukraine. With regards to Vladimir Putin, clearly he's dragging his feet. He's driving time because time is on his side. He wants to use as much time as possible in order to gain as much time as possible on the battlefield, perhaps place Ukraine in further disadvantageous position. So his conversation about the ceasefire and the permanent resolution of the Ukrainian conflict would come from even greater position of strength to what he is right now. But he also understands that there are other conversations that are taking place. So he believes in this sense he may have a space to maneuver. And yes, he is trying to manipulate the Trump administration to some extent by effectively using the whole spectrum of what the Russians and Americans are discussing as part of his bargaining strategy.
We're just hearing that Ukraine's prime minister will visit Washington next week for talks about this minerals deal that the Americans want Kiev to sign. Given the transactional element of the Trump presidency, if that deal is signed, it'll be worth billions, of course, to the Americans. Might that produce a renewed push from Washington?
Well, I think that would certainly be one of the conditions for the Ukrainians that the U.S. administration may want to put forward, because clearly the Ukrainians will still try to attempt in any way possible to connect this deal to some sort of security guarantees, even though the Trump administration made it very clear that the deal itself represents a security guarantee. But that may also be something that the Americans will turn to the Russians and simply say, now we've got this agreement with Ukraine, you need to come out, we need to sort out the lines of divide, the division of sphere of influence, because now we're getting involved as business partners in Ukraine. But here is a catch. The Russians are also trying to get a similar deal with the Americans with regards to rare earths, as well as with regards to other business propositions that they put on the table. One of the latest ones is to acquire a fleet of US-made aircraft in exchange for the United States defreezing about $3 billion of Russia's assets that's been frozen after the start of hostilities in Ukraine. So I think once again it would be a not straightforward conversation, but rather than a set of complex negotiations with conflicting as well as overlapping claims.
Well, Trump says he wants to sign that deal very, very soon. Alexey Muraviev, thank you so much.
Thank you.